Hello everyone, and welcome to my video on the Sorcery Contested Realm rules updates that took place in July of 2025. I'm going to go through them step by step as they're written here on the page where they were first shown. So we're going to go begin going down here and having a look at the first one, which is this one here. Strike the realm, or at least sites. I'll just read the description and then I'm going to outline my response to this rule change. No enemy in your path, no problem. You can now strike undefended sites. A good whack will deal damage directly to the site and drain the life from its controller, just like you'd expect, but be warned. If a charging pistol lands, that weapon shatters on impact. After all, lances is made for dueling, not demolition. This is a strange way of writing what they've written here. A lot of what they're describing is essentially just the way that attacking a site worked before these updates. So I'll give some details about what's changed. Essentially, and I'm doing this in a way that is as simplistic as possible, in a way that is for as newer players as possible, for those of you who've played Sorcery for a while, and this all sounds a bit like, why is he explaining this in such a simplistic way? Before, when minions, or units rather, so not just minions but avatars as well, when they tapped and attacked an enemy site, they would do damage to the enemy avatar, to their health pool, which starts with 20 health, obviously. Now, that's still what happens, but now it never counted before as a strike. Now it simply counts as a strike when any unit does that. What this has changed in pragmatic terms essentially is mainly two things in the games by now when these rules were brought out in the Arthurian Legends meta. The first one, concentrating on what came in alpha and beta, is that there are some minions that have lifesteal. Not that it's called that specifically in Sorcery. There's no actual kind of rule called lifesteal. Perhaps there should be, and if this rule were more commonplace it might change to that later on, but essentially there's some minions that have a special rule that makes it so that when they do damage with a strike, they give that much damage that they have caused with that strike to you as health. They heal you by that much. In Alpha and Beta, there were only two minions in air, one element, that had that special rule. One was Blood Ravens, which you didn't see all that often, and another was Dapple Vampires, which you saw quite a reasonable amount anyway before, very good minion before. In Arthurian Legends, a new one was brought out that was Air Earth, which is Sir Galahad, who also has that special rule. Before, when those three minions were to attack a enemy's site, they did not return any life to you, their controller. Now, when they attack a site, because it counts as a strike, they do return life to your controller. What this means essentially is that those three minions have been buffed. It's just that simple. It's like they have just been made better than they already were. And Galahad and Dapple Vampires were already good before, so they're now even better. And I run both Dapple Vampires now, and I have done this on and off, and Sir Galahad in my favourite constructed deck, which is an Air Earth Pathfinder deck, and they're even better than they were, and they have definitely been buffed. There's no two ways around it. That's all that's really happened from this rule change in their case. Blood Ravens have been buffed as well, significantly so. It's just there's still only a 1 mana cost, 1 power, so it's like I think people are more likely to draft them in limited, for example, and be happy about having them in your deck because of this buff. So they've been buffed as well, but it hasn't been as noticed by me after a month or so of playing since these July updates as Dapple Vampires and Galahad, because I don't use them in my main constructed deck, whereas I do use those two. People did seem more keen to draft Blood Ravens into their draft decks at draft night, though, and it's definitely been buffed as well. So I'm now going to move on to the other big change in practical terms, which has been addressed here in this description that they've provided in the second paragraph here under this rules change. The second big change, because of this rules update to the current Arthurian Legends meta, is to the artifact token weapon that was brought out in Arthurian Legends, Lances. Lances before, when a minion or an avatar holding a lance were to attack an enemy's site, because it didn't count as a strike, the lance would not function. It wouldn't give you any extra damage, and it wouldn't break the lance because of its one used to do some extra damage and to provide first strike to the unit that is using it. Now it's the exact opposite. It's that simple, because all of those units are now striking when they attack an enemy's site. The lances do give +1 power and damage and break on impact when that unit does that damage to that site. There's never really any use to first strike against a site, so you lose that benefit. And when I first read this rule and realised what was going to be happening with lances, at first I thought, is that a nerf or a buff? Because sometimes it might be quite nice to get to hold on to your lance and then just swing it aside and know that the minion or the avatar that you have that lance, or lances for that matter, on, has first strike and the additional power if later on fighting an enemy unit. And from what I've seen from playing some draft nights so far in this last month, since these rules updates happen, has led me to believe that mainly this change in regards to lances is a buff. It's not, I don't really think it's a nerf. I think in general it's better for you to have it with lances. It just seems to me to be better, at least in limited, and I don't think it's going to be any different in constructed. In fact, I don't think it is from what I've seen a little bit of in constructed. It just doesn't, the pros seem very much outweigh the cons. Being able to do just that extra damage if you want to with that lance to an enemy by attacking their undefended site, even though you lose the lance and you didn't really benefit from the first strike, it just seems to be better. It just seems to be better that you get to have that extra damage with that minion or avatar, to me. With that, those are the two big changes because of this Strike the Realm that they've changed the way attacking sites counts as. So I'm going to move down to the next one here, which is the realm responds to interaction. And I'm just going to read it. We're introducing a new concept, interacting with the realm. If your minion does any of these things, casting a spell, striking an enemy, activating a special ability, or dealing damage, it has interacted with the realm. For example, stealth now breaks after a unit interacts with the realm. No more shadowy fireball throwers. And drop, a unit can't use it on a turn where that unit has already interacted with the realm. So there's two big areas which they've addressed here that this changes. It changes stealth dramatically, and it changes the way units work with artifacts dramatically. First of all, I'm going to talk about stealth. Everyone knew this from the moment we all read this. This nerfed Morgana Le Fay, and from what I've observed since this rule came out based on those projections, it's that simple. Once again, a bit like we're striking the realm of Dapper Vampires and to Galahad, Morgana Le Fay has just simply been nerfed. They've accomplished exactly what they wanted to do. She's no longer able to just be there, have stealth, and cast her spells from her hand one turn and then the next without being able to be seen and removed more easily because of not having stealth. Now there were obviously ways to get rid of stealth before, and there were ways to get rid of units that have stealth even if they have stealth, like if she was on a land site, an opponent could use Cave In to remove her, or Earthquake. If she was on a water site, they could use Stormy Seas. They couldn't use Bury and they couldn't use Drown because you have to target. You can't use that on her. But like you could just do those things, etc., etc. But she was still more powerful before. There's no doubts about it. There were ways that you could remove her, but now there's even more. It's more easy to remove her if she wants to get her spells out. She's going to have to cast the first one and lose stealth. However, even though she's definitely been nerfed by this, in some ways there is a little bit of a buff from this, and I'm going to explain that. One of them is I played a game once that I lost with Morgana Le Fay in my deck and in play at the end on an Archimago deck that I was playing. I was versing a Battle Mage. Battle Mages can tend to be rather strong against Archimagos, and I would have loved nothing more in all the world when I was worried about that final grapple shot from the Battle Mage onto my Archimago to perform the death blow than to have had a way to get rid of stealth off my Morgana Le Fay so she could get in the way of the grapple shot. With stealth still on her, like anything else that has stealth on it, she ignores projectiles that ignore her, so the Battle Mage just goes straight through her. And I couldn't do that. I couldn't move her to a position where she could attack a site and still somehow be in the way of my avatar. With this new rules change, even though in general she's been nerfed, I would have been able to remove that stealth when I'd wanted to. And another way that she's been sort of somewhat buffed by this, it's not as much as it is a nerf, I can't stress that enough, but in a way that she's been buffed, now there's no point thinking she's going to be safe with stealth after you've cast the first spell with her. So if you do that in the second turn she's out and she doesn't have summoning sickness, you may as well attack with her. If there's a site undefended, there's no reason not to attack because you're not keeping stealth anyway anymore. So you can play a little bit more aggressive with her in that way, and she has 3 power. She's another 3 power like all of the other ones, and that's not the least amount of damage you can do to an enemy's site. Other minions in the game with stealth that this is nerfed, there's not that many that are spellcasters that I can think of off the top of my head. Something I've noticed in limited play, currently in like the AL meta, is Redbreast Robins tend to be pretty good. They don't have stealth innately, but they don't lose stealth because their ability is not interacting with the realm, because for it to be a special ability that takes it off you, it can't be just an automatic ability. If they deal damage, they lose stealth, but they already did before. And they don't have stealth innately, but what people do like to do sometimes is if they run fire with water, they can give the Redbreast Robin stealth from the guard, the water minion that gives stealth, or from the lookout, the treetop hideout, the air site that gives stealth, both in AL as well. But that ability where they do damage does not count as a special ability. It has to be one where you tap to do it. So no, they don't lose stealth. So I can't really think of any changes to talk about in Limited. And I can't think of any other occasion with other stealth minions where this really sort of is noticeable all that much. Sometimes occasionally you might run a treetop hideout with the deck and you have Grandmaster Wizard and you give them stealth and then it'll matter with them, but they still work like sort of, that nerfs them because they can cast a few spells without losing stealth that they gained from that other source. But the thing is, they don't have like spells of their own in their own special hand that you kind of want to cast in a timely manner, because you can lose them into your cemetery if they die. That's only Morgana Le Fay, and I think that so far really this rule change in regards to stealth is only most significant with that one minion, Morgana Le Fay. This also nerfs dropping artifacts. I haven't seen a deck in a while. There was something that was going on in beta where people would run, like, say, a Death Speaker, and they'd run a lot of Apprentice Wizards and Grandmaster Wizards, and they would juggle their Philosopher's Stone. They would just cast a spell of an element with the Death Speaker, say, with the Philosopher's Stone for the discount. Then they drop the Philosopher's Stone with the Death Speaker, pick it up with the Grandmaster Wizard on the same side, and cast another spell of that exact same element, also with the discount, and so on and so forth, before finally dropping the Philosopher's Stone and picking it up one last time with the Death Speaker to sort of have it safe and sound until the next turn. You can't do that anymore. It's gone. But the thing is, I haven't seen it in a while. I haven't seen anyone doing that in so long that it's just not something I've really noticed. What I have noticed, and this is often just with Lancers, is this rule change with the interacting of the realm disallowing a unit to drop an artifact after they've done it. is it just makes it more difficult to use artifacts. You need to be more careful, especially if you're coming into this meta with this new rule and you're used to the meta before with the artifacts where it was a little bit more easy for you to just drop and pick up artifacts. You need to be more mindful of, well, will I be able to pick this artifact back up after I've done what I want to do, etc, etc. It makes it a bit more difficult, but eventually once you've had enough practice and you're used to it, you'll probably get the hang of it. I think that's everything I want to say about that one. So we're going to move down to the next one here, which is avatars can fly now. Yes, really. When this rule first came out, I'll just read it first before I talk about it. They fly now, they fly now. If your avatar gains airborne keyword, they can take full advantage of it, soaring over enemies, moving diagonally, and benefiting from elevated defense. That means, yes, the Dragon Lord can stretch its wings. I'm so happy that they mentioned the Dragon Lord there at the end like that, because that's really going to be important to what I now have to say. When this rule first came out, people were talking about, well, the only real scenario where an avatar really gains flying right now is if they're mounted on one of the horses, the Stallion or the Warhorse from Fire, or the Stallion, I can't remember the full name of the air horse. If that had picked them up and then it gets airborne from, say, Power of Flight, the air spell, the avatar would then, by extension, gain flight. And then it was the same with the Zeppelin from Beta, the air minion that can pick them up, would now grant them airborne as well. But beyond that, there wasn't really many scenarios where the avatars would really gain airborne. It was only in those niche examples where there had to be a minion that gains airborne or has airborne innately that picks them up. With the release of Dragon Lord, however, I'm just going to go back up here a little bit because I want to point at these dragons here. The Dragon Lord, because of his innate ability, he spends 3 mana on to gain a dragon's ability. The Dragon Lord does gain airborne a lot, and when this rule really became important and interesting and could be observed a lot, in at least constructed by me, was with a Dragon Lord. And I have to say that without this rule change, the Dragon Lord would not have been good enough. And with this rule change so that avatars can gain flying, which means he can, when he takes on the form of whichever dragon you've chosen for that Dragon Lord deck for him to gain the abilities of, it's really, really nice. It's really fun and useful to be able to gain that dragon's airborne when you happen to be taking on the abilities of a dragon that has airborne. One of my favourite, which is right here with the Dragon Lord, is Ignis Rex. I'm playing with a mono fire Dragon Lord deck at the moment, and the fact that he gets airborne as well as everything else in regards to how he works as an avatar with this dragon is really fun. Him being able to go diagonally to get in position to use the rest of this dragon's text box ability is nice. It's nice for the other things that are going on with the deck. It's like he quite likes to strike on enemy sites when he's going to get closer to that enemy to try and use the other ability anyway, being able to move diagonally. You often want to do that onto the enemy site, so being able to strike at those sites diagonally with the airborne is nice. You might want to avoid being intercepted in order to do a critical, the other ability, which means you can fly onto a site with enemy units that are grounded and they can't intercept him. That's also nice. And what's the other thing? Because that's a mono fire deck, one of the spells that I run is Mad Dash, which differs from Blink in that it doesn't move you nearby diagonally. It gives you +1 movement. Well, if you've got +1 movement with something that's got airborne, you can go very far. When you can go 2 steps diagonally, you can go what would be the equivalent for a grounded unit of 5 steps with those 2. That +1 movement, so 2 movement with airborne. It's terrific. It's a lot of fun. I run another Dragon Lord deck, which coincidentally happens to be with Calestis, which is an all elements Dragon Lord deck. And so far, his having airborne is useful, but it's not as noticeably useful so far with that deck. But it could be at some point eventually. Like, it's still definitely nice that he gets airborne. It's also just a lot of fun. Having airborne on him when he does this is really, really fun, to be able to move and to have all of the other benefits of airborne in your turn. So that's where this rule was really important and game changing, though not exactly, because Dragonlord was always of the meta it came into, and it came into the meta where this rule change already well and truly established. With that, I'm going to move on to the next one down here, which is immobile means immobile. Let's put this one to rest. When a unit is immobile, it simply cannot move itself. But don't confuse stillness with helplessness. An immobile unit can attack and defend at its current location. So, this rule change buffs some cards and it nerfs some cards. The cards that it buffs, and this stuck out to people immediately, is Pudge Butchers. And given that it's been a month since these rule changes were brought out, from what I've observed from my own playtesting and gameplay, including with the Witch deck I'm having a lot of fun that runs 3 Pudge Butchers, is those people who thought that Pudge Butcher was going to be buffed by this were completely correct. It's that simple. Once again, just like with the Dapper Vampires and Galahad, the Pudge Butcher is just better now, and it was already good before. With this rule change, being able to swing on the enemy sites that you get the Pudge Butcher onto with, say, a Wars or something like that when there's no good targets to hook at is terrific. It's game changing. It feels really good. It feels like how that unit, that minion should be as well. That being said, I don't think that Pudge Butchers have been buffed quite as much as Dapper Vampires and Galahad and the Bloodraven, I suppose. Like, they can block now, which is also really nice, but what they can't do is they can't block something that is attacking a site or another unit on a site adjacent to them. They still can't move off the site that they're on because of immobile. Excuse me. Which means they've definitely been buffed, but they haven't been... But they're still limited because of immobile. Immobile is still a limitation on whichever unit has it, and that's one that's I've noticed with Pudge Butchers, despite all of the improvements they've now received from this rules change. They are... other cards have been nerfed. Bog in Water that came out in Arthurian Legends, and Quagmires from Alpha and Beta. Those 2 sites that immobilise things have both been nerfed. Entangling Roots, the aura that immobilises in the 4 squares, has also been nerfed for other decks that wanted to use them, apart from with Enchantress, where it's been both nerfed and buffed. Before, because it immobilises itself the moment you manifest it or turn it into an aura, animated. Sorry, it's there, luckily the Enchantress is here. Because it immobilised itself in the last meta before these rules changes, when you animated it into a minion with Enchantress, it couldn't swing an attack, even on a site it was on already that was an enemy site, with which an aura that's not difficult to accomplish when they cover 4 squares like Entanglement does. Now, it can swing at any of the enemy sites it happens to already be on. In general, with an Enchantress, it's a buff. They're not as effective as mobilising the enemies, just like anything else that used to be better because of it causing immobility to enemy units. It's been nerfed as well, but it's also really been buffed with Enchantress. And also these sources of immobilisation, like Quagmire and Bog, hasn't been entirely nerfed either. Like Quagmire, in some ways, before could be a little bit of a pain when it immobilised some of your own units you didn't want immobilised. Now, if those units are already on an enemy site and you would have liked to have swung with them, Quagmire isn't as annoying in regards to you using it because you're aiming to mobilise something else of the enemies. If your minions are within range of that big nearby, like 9 square area of the Quagmire, they can still swing and attack the site. They can also block if they happen to be in range and they receive immobilise from the Quagmire, whereas before your own units couldn't block if you wanted to do that. They still can. So there's pros and cons. Like it's in many ways it's about change. It's about you've got to adjust to the change, and you'll find that there's things that can be beneficial and things that aren't, and it's about learning what you want to do now with this shift in the meta with the immobilise rule. I feel like the change is pretty good. I feel like it makes it less similar to disable, and disable really just a little bit more powerful. I'm pretty happy about it buffing entanglement in Entangle Terrain with for Enchantress, and I'm happy about the buff to Barge Butchers. Let's move to the next one. You means you. So already in the meta before this rules change, this is almost a little bit of an errata, really. An FAQ change. You means you. A lot of the time when there is a reference to you before, I'm actually going to scroll up so I can see these three for this. A lot of the times when there was reference to you before, it really did just mean you, not the avatar anyway. However, that wasn't always the case and it was a bit confusing. Now they've really just sort of made it so it's more just consistent, so it's less confusing. And with this change, they have buffed Enchantress and Spark Mage. Once upon a time, I did wonder, before referencing the FAQs in the last meta, does Enchantress have to be the spellcaster to animate an aura? To animate the aura into a minion if she, and only she, not one of her minion spellcasters, casts a spell. Eventually, when I looked into it, it turned out she did have to be. Now, she doesn't. They've changed it because it's you means you, and there's this you reference twice on her text box. Any of her spellcasters can cast it, and she can always, because any method by any of her minions have cast a spell, or units of casters, or even just like artifacts, if it's Orb of Balberif, she can animate an aura into a minion. That's a buff to her, and it's a buff to her that I think she should get, and I'm happy about it. Spark Mage was the exact same situation. From the even in regards to his completely different ability. Early on in beta, I did wonder at a certain point, well, does he have to be the spellcaster of the air spells to then be able to tap and do damage based on the air threshold of spells that he's cast? And at first I thought, well, I would assume so from the way it's written on this text box, just like with the Enchantress. And then I looked into it, and on the FAQ, it turned out that he did have to be the spellcaster indeed. Now, he doesn't. You on his text box means you, the player, not him, the avatar, which means that other spellcasters can cast air spells, and he still gets the threshold from those air spells to be able to use for his tap ability to do damage with that air threshold, with his tap ability. And with air, there's a lot of spellcasters, Grandmaster Wizards, Apprentice Wizards. Spellcasters are commonplace within the air element. This is a buff to Spark Mage, and it's a good buff, and I'm happy about it as well. Death Speaker, it's the same. I never sort of stopped and thought that that he wouldn't be able to. It wouldn't be able to be like another spellcaster who casts the minion, because it just never came up in any games with a Death Speaker. It was never an issue. There was never a time where there happened to be, I don't know, some maddening bells near a Death Speaker, and I and another player wondered, well, does he now have to pay extra mana to summon the minion from the cemetery with his ability that we'll get to use its Genesis ability, if it has a Genesis ability? It just never came up. But it may have come up for other players, and now it's the same as with these other two. With the Death Speaker, any of his spellcasters can use his from the cemetery summon of the minions from either cemetery before they are banished. And that improves him as well. And once again, it's I think this is a great improvement. There's something else that's happened though with this rules change though. On the avatar of Earth from Alpha, there's a reference to you, which does not mean the player. It clearly means the avatar. Everyone's mentioned, or a lot of people have probably noticed this and mentioned it online since these rules have come out. There's simply probably an FAQ by now that makes it clear that in this specific case it's an exception to this new change, and you means the avatar in that case. And if there's ever any future releases of Avatars of Earth or something like that, I should imagine that on those later Avatars of Earth, their text box will be changed to reflect that that nature of their ability with this new way of communicating on the text box of the cards with what you means in the context of sorcery for these rules on the text box. I'm going to go down to the next rule here, which are big units, clearer language. Oversized units, those glorious units that occupy more than one location, have always pushed the bounds of the board. But how do cards that say its site or its location interact with something that big? You pick a single site or location it occupies, respectively. Okay, so this rules change. Before, in this rules change, when you had something like a mountain giant that covered 4 squares, a minion that would occupy 4 squares, or even Enchantress animated one of its auras that covered more than 1 square, quite often 4 squares, sometimes 2, they would count as occupying all of those squares. So that meant that, like, to begin with, an issue of confusion that came up is, well, what do you do with artifacts? Can a mountain giant pick an artifact up from one of its locations and then drop it at another location that it occupies that entire time? And very early on, Irafei, I believe, in his rules document, his errata that he was creating, he wrote, and I think this is based on the FAQ that Eric's Curiosa Limited was making clear, he wrote out that you have to drop the artifact back to the same location where you picked it up. I don't think that's changed. I think that's still that way. Before, in the last meta, if you had a minion like a mountain giant or an aura that had been animated that covered 4 sites, 4 locations that it occupied, if you cast Spin Attack, which describes in the spell's text box as causing that unit to strike everything at any location it occupies, the mountain giant or the animated aura would do its power, its damage in a strike to everything on those sites. Like everything at those 4 locations of those sites. Huge amount of damage potentially. Never saw this happening myself in a game against me, but I'd heard about enchantresses who were running fire as one of their elements doing it, and it sounded powerful, extremely powerful. They can't do that anymore. With this rule change, anything that occupies more than one of those sites still has to treat anything that has to do with a location as just one of those locations. You're probably able to pick a different one each time. You could probably cast Spin Attack with an animated aura or a mountain giant and do damage to one location one time, and then you cast another Spin Attack, you'd be able to choose another one the next time. There's some interesting power there that you get from the fact that you occupy those 4 sites. Flexibility, but you can't do it to all of the sites any longer. You can't do all of that damage with Spin Attack to 4 locations. And that's the biggest and most profound nerf and change that I can recognise from this new rule. There's nothing else that really leaps to mind that this is changed that I can think of. It might mean like, there's nothing that really leaps to mind other than that Spin Attack scenario because of this rule change right now. So I'll move on to the next one. Intercept made simple. This one's an interesting one, what I have to say about this in a moment once I finish reading what they've written here about the change that's been brought out. Intercept has previously been a little tricky to explain to new players. And now it's as simple as this. If an enemy used move and attack without attacking, you can intercept. The timing for attack and intercept are now the same after all movement is completed. Did they attack? You can defend. Did they choose not to attack? You can intercept. Note the movement +1 and faster units can now speed by any possible interceptors, since interception now only occurs after all movement is completed, if they choose not to attack. Alright then, so before in the last meta, when a unit moved through a site until it completed its move by stopping at another site location, or if it moved into another site once before stopping at that location, if there was an enemy unit there that was untapped either at the site that that unit moved through or at the site that that unit finished its move on, and they could intercept. Now, if a unit moves through a site to another site that they eventually end their move on with extra movement, any units that were untapped on that site they moved through could not intercept. So before, if a unit wanted to move with extra movement and attack eventually, if it still went through a site with an untapped enemy unit, that untapped enemy unit could obviously intercept. Now they can't. And that's all there is really to it. Other than that, it's the same. Before, if you moved to attack the site one step away, and there was an enemy unit on it untapped, they weren't intercepting, they were always just defending, just like they're defending now. Now, if that enemy unit moves into a site but doesn't want to attack, you get to intercept just like you did before. Anyway, the only big difference is that now units that have more movement, +1 or more movement, move through a site that has an enemy in it that is untapped. They can't untap anymore. So this is a big buff to units that have more movement, essentially. However, I have a few things to say about this. I heard from others and read on Discord, like the official Discord with people making comments, etc., that this rule intercept was confusing new players. In my opinion, the reason that this new rule was confusing to new players is because, in practical terms, no one was ever really using intercept. No one was ever making any maneuvers that very, like, I almost can't remember, I may have seen it like once or twice after years of playing Sorcery. No one ever performed a maneuver, moved a unit in a way that gave an opponent the ability to intercept. Intercept was relevant, important, because it was causing people to do things in order to avoid being intercepted. But like it was almost never the case that someone would actually give the opponent the ability to intercept. It could happen occasionally. Occasionally you'd be like, I just want to move in here and see if the enemy intercepts, on very rare occasions for certain strategic reasons that could be the case in those rare cases. A little bit like when someone taps to attack and they're not quite sure if an enemy is going to block, defend or not. But it was very, very rare that you would see it. And now, since these rules updates, what have I observed in this last month of playing since these rules updates? Nothing has really changed. Everyone is not letting the opponent get to intercept just like they would before. In regards to this one area, you won't notice it very much. It's just like it's the same. Like, people weren't letting enemies intercept before, or they were avoiding intercept by not moving one step into the square that the enemy unit that was untapped occupied. Anyway, so it's the same as it was before. Anyway, there's not that much +1 movement or +1 or more movement out there. Things that have airborne could never be intercepted except for things that have ranged or airborne themselves. That's still the case. If they move into one site just like before and there's something there that doesn't have airborne range, they can't intercept it. So you might be more likely to see that, but it's the same as it was before anyway. And in regards to this buffs units that have +1 movement, that's true, but like people going on about Cloud Spirit, which has a +2 movement being buffed by this rule. Cloud Spirits have been buffed by this rule because of things with extra movement not being able to be intercepted. But the thing is, Cloud Spirits weren't being intercepted before because they don't just have +2 movement, they also have airborne. So they were really hard to intercept before. And even if there did happen to be a ranged unit or an air unit that happened to be somewhere that might have been able to intercept them before, that +1/2 movement combined with airborne means that they can go quite far diagonally because they've got airborne as well. So it's not that hard. It wasn't that hard before, and now it wasn't that hard before for them to avoid the things that had airborne on range that could have intercepted them before. However, it's a little bit easier for them now. They can definitely go just a little bit further under certain rare circumstances where there's something with airborne or something with range that happens to be in the way that can intercept them. So that's all there is to say about that rule. And that's all there is to say about each of these rules in general. I hope that anyone who watches this enjoyed and has got something to think about with what I have to say about these rules changes from what I've observed of how they've changed the game. Thanks very much.